Okay, so couple reminders. This is my last day for 2 weeks. You have Ryan Goss coming in next week. He is a Syracuse-based developer who works at Density, which was founded in the Syracuse area and is now an SF-based company. But he's going to be coming in and teaching you all about application programming interfaces, gives you a chance to kind of marry up all of the JavaScript stuff you've been working with real-world data coming in, accessing other data, and then also kind of an overview of how the internet works. So Ryan has been with Careers in Code as long as I have, all the way going back to the first cohort. So he is a very talented and very skilled engineer, and he will be teaching you all about APIs. So that's what's and the internet in general. So that's what's coming up. Today we are wrapping up the blog. So we're going to do a little bit with the get parameter routing and then more practice working with arrays and finding specific things and getting the delete button to work. So that's what's coming down the pipeline. But with all of that said, one final reminder. Next Thursday is OpenHack. We will be canceling class for that and encouraging everyone to attend OpenHack in person if you can make it. No big deal if you can't. So you'll have Ryan Monday through Wednesday, and then on Thursday, OpenHack will be in person. And I know Ryan said he was excited to attend as well. So next Thursday will be OpenHack Common Space downtown. If you have not responded to the meetup link, I'm going to ask Doug to post that in the Zoom chat. Unless I have it easily accessible. I do. Never mind. I got it, Doug. Sorry.
All right, you beat me to it.
So if you get a chance, go ahead and RSVP to that. That just gives Mike a chance. Actually, I don't know what Mike will be bringing food-wise because all 3 Jimmy John's in the area are now closed, and Jimmy John's has been a staple of OpenHack forever. So
last time it was pizza.
Okay. So dinner will be provided, dinner and snacks and all of that good stuff. And I should be able to also be there as well and make it. Reminder that one-on-ones are available. If you look at a couple people and you still can't schedule a one-on-one, I encourage everyone to reach out over Slack. Normally people can work with you on times and find another time that works for you. Other than that, we are headed into the last day of JavaScript. So what did we learn yesterday on the JavaScript blog?
Well, we use local storage.
We use local storage. Why did we use local storage?
Because we have to store the information somewhere to reference it later to go back and retrieve it.
Exactly. And that's what's kind of different about local storage versus a regular variable in JavaScript. Normally a variable in JavaScript, you can only access on that one page, right? That one script. But local storage allows us to access information on different pages and also, like the name implies, store it. So if we leave the site and come back to it, we can get that information. Local storage is widely used in modern web apps. However, most of the data that we store in a modern web app is going to end up on a server-side database, which we will be working our way up to using a database and building out our own APIs. But until we get then, local storage is a great place to store the information we're using.
Adding on to the local storage, we had to change the data type in order to actually store it.
Yeah, so getting more real world usage, right? Understanding, hey, we're storing multiple pieces of data about this post, so we should put all of that in an object. But working with local storage and realizing that, hey, JSON itself is a string, but what it is notating, what it is representing is an object, right? So getting practice with that parse in the stringify and learning all of that from there. What else did we learn yesterday?
We did some new stuff to the event object, like prevent default.
Yeah, what do we need event default for?
Stop the page from reloading before does what we need it to do.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got a form submission, and by default, the browser is trying to be helpful and submit that form to the web server, right? But we don't really have a web server. We don't have a backend right now. So that's when that event.prevent default comes in handy. We're preventing the default behavior of the browser for that event to refresh the page. And that is a very handy tool that's easy to forget when we're developing JavaScript apps. Of, hey, we don't actually want the form to submit, so let's go ahead and try it and prevent that from happening. Is there anything else from yesterday or any sections of code that we want to re-review before we dive in today?
We use Bootstrap. Well, using the preset codes and Bootstrap to bring it over to our code.
Yep, so that is pre-built Bootstrap components, and we're also using the grid system, hopefully tying this all back together, realizing that everything that we build, all of these concepts, are able to build on top of each other, right? So back in the very beginning, we started using the grid, then we layered in some components. Now we've got our JavaScript working, but kind of understanding that nothing exists in a vacuum, right? So our CSS is talking to our HTML is interacting with our JavaScript is generating more HTML to show to the user. Now we're kind of building up the layers of complexity to something that's hopefully an application that you could preview yourself, and you could see yourself using it in the real world. Anything else from yesterday?
Yeah, the date to locale or time.
Yeah, so we started working with dates and realizing that dates are kind of complicated in that they store time zone information, and they can store you can represent a date in multiple ways, right? So we think,
Max,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but this kind of ties in. I think
Yeah.
it would probably be helpful, just like before we go into the next section, to maybe like just quickly in your way go over that transition from taking the values from the on submit event and using those to populate the post.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Let me run through that. Okay, so this is our code from yesterday, just to give everyone like an orientation of where we're at. We're working in 3 different files, right? So general flow of this is we started at index.html, and let me actually go live in the browser so you can see this. So we start on this page here, right? And we're like, all right, our blog posts are showing up, but we want to create a new post. So what is helpful is to start in your interface and then kind of pull the thread through the code to make sure you're understanding how this data is flowing, right? So we start with this new post button. So we try and find that in our index.html, and that's going to be right up here. No JavaScript involved here, just an A tag going to the href of new.html. So if we click on that there, we get to a new page. And then we go to our new.html and figure out what's going on in here. So over in the user interface, we've got a form, and that form has 3 fields and a button. So we go and we look at our code and we make sure we understand, hey, we've got our 3 fields, 2 of which are inputs, the other of which is a text area. And then we've got this button with a type submit. That type submit goes up to this on submit and runs this function called add post. So the on submit is what's bridging the gap between our HTML and our JavaScript. So now we get into, okay, how's this interactivity work? This entire add post function, what is it doing? So we come in here and first things first, we say prevent the default action. We don't want the form to refresh the page and lose our data. We're saying, yo, browser, we've got this under control. We're going to write our own JavaScript to handle this form submit. Then we come down here and we get into the first of the data types, right? We got to figure out what data are we trying to capture. So we go to the event target. That is the entire form. And we use the HTML elements inside of that to pull out the title value, tagline value, and content value. Well, where are all of those coming from? Those are trickling through the event that is coming from the submit and using the 3 names, tagline, title, and content in order to get access to whatever was actually typed in to the inputs in the text area. So we come down here and we store all of that information in an object. Now, why are we storing it in an object? Because all 3 or 4 of these pieces of data are related to the post. So if we shoved all of that information into an array without using an object, it would be hard to tell what information belonged to what post. So to set ourselves up for success, we take all of this information and store it into an object called post. Now, we also got a little sneaky there and stored one other piece of information into that object, and we used the date.now function. Date.now is actually storing the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. The reason why we do it in that date format is numbers of a date, whether they're in milliseconds or seconds or whatever it is, are often easier to work with than a string of the date itself. So what we do here is we store the date into the object along with the title, the tagline, and the content, and then we console log that out. I'm pausing to take a breath and also to let you guys ask any questions if you have them.
So is the date.now measurable in milliseconds? Because if we did a string, that would be static unless we changed it every day.
So the date.now is just as static as if we stored the date as a string. When this function actually runs, it's going to take that static moment in time and store it into this post object that we're about to put into the array. If we wanted to, we could store the date as a string, right? And we could say month, day, year with slashes in between them and the time. The problem is then that becomes a little bit more difficult to work with. What if instead of showing up the date itself, what if we wanted to say, hey, this was posted 3 days ago? Now, all of a sudden, we've got to take this string in and manipulate the string in order to understand that it's a date. Compared to if we take the time in milliseconds, it's much easier to convert that back into a date.
Okay, easier to convert. And to allow for not just the date reference, but the date in association with when the viewer is reading the post.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we're capturing here is just the time that the post was made. And so if you see when I go back here, today is December 1st, happy 1st of December. But you see my 2 posts on my homepage are showing up the time that we created those posts last night, right? And so what we did is made it a little bit easier to convert a date from the milliseconds into a date that we wanted to show the end user. Date math is like black magic in programming. Dates are notoriously hard to work with for developers. In fact, there is a great YouTube video that I will post. I think it's Tom Scott. Yeah. There is a great video that I would encourage everyone to watch either during the break or after class tonight on why dates are so complicated. I just put that into the live stream and we'll also dump it in the Zoom chat. Really great video on why dates are hard. But the TLDR, the too long didn't read on this, is that we're using date in milliseconds, not only so it is easier for us to work with that date format, but also so we can use it as an ID, which will make more sense later tonight. Okay, so any other questions on what we've covered so far? We have the basic flow of the form. Do we have any questions about the form or the submit or the object? Okay, so let's keep going here. Now we get into kind of the nitty gritty of how we're going to save all of these posts. So we make this thing called let posts because we know we're going to store our posts somewhere and we need access to it throughout the function. So we set up our let posts. We don't define it as anything yet. And then we go to this thing window, which is kind of like document. We always have access to it in JavaScript that's running in the browser. We go to local storage, which is built into JavaScript in the browser, and we get this item using the key called posts. We then store that in a variable called stored posts. But the problem that we need to handle is twofold. One, we need to handle that the local storage only stores a string. So what we end up needing to having to do is take that string that is stored in JavaScript object notation and parse it back out into an array we can work with. We also need to handle the fact that it may be the very first post that has been created and there is nothing in local storage. So what we do is we say, if there are stored posts, take those stored posts and parse out the JSON into an array that we store in posts. Else, if there are not stored posts, make the post equal to an empty array. So whenever we see an if-else statement or any if statement, we want to kind of want to ask ourselves, when does this run? This stored posts is going to run if there are stored posts in local storage. If there are not, we are going to run the code down here, which is going to start it out as an empty array. So from here, we finally have our posts as an array. Whether it came from local storage, whether it's a blank array, we don't really care at this point. What we do is we say, take that array of either all the existing posts or an empty array because there aren't any posts there, and push, in other words, add to the end of the array the post. Well, where's the post coming from? Our post is this big object up here is getting accessed right here and getting pushed into our posts array, which is either coming from an empty array or coming from our local storage.
And that's the new post that we're pushing.
This right up here is the new post that we are pushing down here. Yes. Absolutely. So once we do all of that work, we're not out of the woods quite yet. We only added it to the posts array that we have access to in this script. Now that we've made that array and added in our new post, we need to put it back into local storage. So instead of using get item, we use set item down here. We use this same key, so we are consistent everywhere. We take our posts that we just pushed the individual post to, and we stringify it. Stringifying it is the opposite of parsing it. We are taking this array, turning it into a string, storing it in a key called posts in our local storage. Pausing there before we leave the page, which is what the window.location./ does. So it's making more sense than last night, about the same level of sense as last night.
Honestly, what I'm really not understanding still is the JSON or JSON or whatever. Is that built in JavaScript or?
That is.
Okay.
JSON.stringify is built in just like window and local storages, or that's kind of it for built-in functions that we're using here. But yes, window is built in just like JSON is built in.
Max, you think it might help to like show them what like JSON looks like, just kind of just a random like some JSON notation?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
what exactly is JSON doing?
So JSON is just a string. It is a string that looks like an object, but is still a string. So if we break that down a little bit, we can console log out our stored posts right here. And when I go into the new post page and open up my inspect, let me do this. So I add my post in here, I hit the post button, and let me comment out 51 as well. Okay, try that again. So here, what we did is we went into local storage, we got out the posts, and in our console log, we console logged out the stored posts. So we come over here and we're looking at this and we're like, well, that looks like an array of objects to me. However, it is not. It is JavaScript object notation. In other words, it is specific syntax that takes an object or an array and represents that as a string. So when we actually look at this, this is not an object or an array yet. We need to take this string and convert it into an object. The way we do that is with a console.log json.parse stored posts. So when we do that, we now see our JavaScript object here coming out on line 54. That was our initial console log that we added in. But then on our 55, we parsed out the stored posts. In other words, we converted this data that's stored as a string that represents an object and made it into a real object or array.
Okay. So I'm making some comments here and I want to make sure that they match up right. So if stored posts, if there are posts, store them after converting a string into an object.
Correct.
If there aren't any posts, that empty posts just
gives us a placeholder that we can push the post into.
okay.
Right. It's kind of like you can't start making a list until you get the piece of paper out first. This is the piece of paper that we can then start adding items to the list to.
That was good. Okay.
And if you want to think about this one, this is like you can look at an image of text, right? You can open up something and you see it as a .jpeg file and you're like, okay, that looks like text, but I know that's not text, that's really an image. What we do by parsing it out is we say, take the image of the text and convert it into actual text. There's probably a better analogy out there for that, but what we're basically doing is we're saying this represents an object, take that data and turn it into a real object. And then we do the same in reverse because, and you'll see this, by the way, with the API module all over the place. The internet, really, really bad at transmitting arrays, transmitting objects. What the internet is really good about is transmitting text. So what we do is that text gets transmitted to us and our JavaScript is like, I don't know what you want me to do, dude. This is a string. I can't access keys. I don't know that there's an array in here. You just told me this is a string. And so when we parse that data out, JSON can look at that and go, no, you're not a string anymore. You are now an actual object that we can access and use.
So take object-like information and actually turn it into an object.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
Let me see.
If you're familiar with, this might be a kind of another analogy too. It's like file compression, Jennifer, like kind of like, you know how like a file, if you want to transport it somewhere, sometimes they'll shrink it to a format that's not really all that usable, so that it's easier to like transfer somewhere. And then when that person gets that compressed file, then they uncompress it. Like it's almost like local storage is like compressing the data into a string. It looks like a string, but it's JSON. And then once you have that data, like as the JSON, then you can kind of pluff it up and like do whatever you want to do with it.
That's a great explanation. Yeah, thank you.
So what or how is JSON helping us in our code right now? Like not changing, not parsing or whatever, just JSON itself.
So we can't store an object into local storage. So because we can't put that object into local storage, we ask JSON to stringify it into a string. When we stringify it, that is now a string. It is no longer an object. It
Right.
represents an object using object notation, but it is not an object anymore. It's a string. So we plunk that into local storage. Then when we want to work with that data again, we pull it out of local storage and it's still a string. It looks like an object. It uses object notation, still a string. So we tell JSON to reverse the process and parse it out. And the JSON.parse goes, oh, I know what these square brackets mean. I know what these curly braces mean. I know what the objects mean. I'm going to take that object notation as a string and make it back into an object.
Okay.
So if we're looking at our two examples here, our stored posts, this is coming right out of our local storage. It's still a string. If we look at our JSON parse stored posts, we can tell it's an object again because that it's formatted in the console. Well, if this is an object again, I should be able to go into my array and pull out the first title, which is ABC. So if I come over here, I say, after you parse it out, go get the first item in the array and show me the title. So if I come over here, I can see my ABC comes out. Now, if I try and do that same thing over here before I parse it out and say .0.title, it's like undefined. I don't know what that is. You're trying to work with a string. I don't know what you're trying to get there. Because we didn't tell it, hey, this stored post is actually an object or an array. Parse this out first. And once it's parsed out, then I can get access to my data and do push on it and all of that kind of stuff. Basically, it is still a string. It's a string masquerading as an object. It is a string that is encoding the object information using that JSON object notation. Any other questions on that? Okay, so we finally, oh, any more?
No, sorry. I was
Okay.
just
Okay, so we finally shove this information. We take our posts array, we turn it back into a JSON string, and we set it into our local storage with the key of posts. Then we change the Windows location back to the home page. That slash with nothing after it is saying go back to the home page. So we do. Go back to our homepage code. I'm going to test this. Happy December. It's that time of year. Oh God, here comes the music. Okay, so we are in there. We got our Happy December showing up. Now, again, we want to take this user experience and break it down in the code. So we go to our index.html. I see my div class call loading in my posts, but I'm not seeing the code that's making my posts actually show up. So I go down to my JavaScript, and now I see, hey, we go to local storage and we get the item posts. This looks familiar. What we set into local storage right here, we are retrieving from our local storage right here. We then say, if there are stored posts, parse it out. This is coming out as a string right here. This is converting it back to the array. We then say, if there are not stored posts, then just assume that the post is an empty array. So we come down here, now we set it up and we say, hey, whatever HTML we're going to generate out, start it as an empty string. So we have a place to put our HTML as we're generating it. We check our posts for the length. The length is a property on every array where it represents the number of items in that array. So if there aren't any items in it, we make this div class call and say that there are no posts yet. Then we come down here and we loop over posts, which is an array, to give us access to each object, each post inside of that array. Then we come down here and say, add on to, don't replace, but add on. So every post is going to get this new HTML in here. This HTML is used as a template literal, which we know because we're using the backticks. And a template literal is just a fancy string that allows us to dump variable content into that string by using this $curly brace. So we get the post. Our post is trickling through our array, which is eventually coming from our local storage, and it pulls out the title, the tag, and the tag. It pulls out the title and the tagline. Well, where are those coming from? Those are coming from our post object right here. Then we do some fancy stuff with the date and pull out a date string and a locale string. Those are built into JavaScript that just format the date for us. So this post.date is taking a weird number of milliseconds, converting it into a date so that we can pull out the date string and the time string. And then finally, we added in this read more button, and we use this get parameter for the first time in order to drop that date information into the post page. Pausing there for questions.
I had to add some code that I hadn't done yesterday, so all of that was so there's a card that contains the title of the blog and the date it was posted. That's the card body, the card title.
Yep. And that's all done in the loop here. So what we're doing is we're saying generate out this HTML for each post that exists. And once we're done with that loop, take all the generated HTML and put it into our element with the ID of posts.
Each post that exists, move through the HTML. I can spell this. And then store it back into the generated HTML.
Yep.
I remembered it. Thanks.
Any other questions on this before we get into new stuff for today? Okay, so before we get too far, I want to make a new folder so we are keeping track of the progress we're making. Excuse me. I'm going to go to my code, my week 10. I'm going to duplicate my day 3. I'm going to rename it as day 4. I'm going to compress this and send it to you guys in the live stream if you would like to use my starter code instead of your own code. I am then going to pop this open in VS Code and start a live share with you guys. That is live. And then I'm going to primarily be focusing in my post.html, where I left off my post date exists in URL. Use that to show the correct info from local storage. Give you guys a minute to get set up there, and then we will dive in.
You put it in Slack.
Yes.
you-
You can put it in the Zoom chat as well.
Oh, there it is.
Is it okay if we use the same folder? Because I've been just adding onto the code from my GitHub.
That's fine. You can keep going on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that zip is only if like you were behind yesterday and you want to just catch up to where we left off, you are welcome to do that. But if you are all caught up or almost all the way caught up, you're welcome to keep using your own code. You won't need to turn this in for a homework assignment, but you will be going through and adding comments to it, and I will have that up to date by tomorrow. And also finally make it so you can turn in your free code camp homework as well.
I just sent you a screenshot. I don't know if you got it or not.
I
on
did.
Slack.
That's fine.
Yeah, Max, I did the same thing until I looked into the assignment and clicked the submit button to realize that's where to put it.
All good. I was not clear on that, so I will make sure that is all set, and then I'll send you guys a note in Slack when it's cleared up. Okay, we good to write some new code here? Okay. So let's recap here. When I click on any one of these read mores, I forgot to go live. That might help. So I am on my homepage and I click this read more button and I have this post stuff goes in up here, but notice what's in the URL. It's this one really long number ending in apparently the devil 666. Okay, well, I take that. If I go back and I click on another post, we get the other date number showing up in here. We're going to use this information as a unique ID. In other words, we're going to use this number to go into our local storage, find the right post that matches that number, and then show that information on this page. What that's going to allow us to do is to have one page called post.html that is going to be reused on all three or however many posts we actually have. And that is how this is actually done by real blogs, by real websites. They create one template page that they can reuse for all the different types of data, because that data type is always consistent. It always has a title, it always has a tagline, it always has the content. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to take out this note because this was a reminder from us that, hey, we got that date in the URL. We need a way to extract it out of the URL. So the way we do that is we use another thing built into our JavaScript called URL. So we say const params equals, params short for parameters, and then we say new URL, and we need to tell it where to get the URL from. So we use our window.location, and then we use a specific piece of that location called the href. And if we wanted to see where all of that was coming from, we could console log out our window.location to see in our console that location has all kinds of information in it. It's got the host, it's got the href, it's got all kinds of information in it, the origin, the path name, the port, the protocol. We don't actually need all of that information. We just want the href. We want the whole thing. We dump that into this thing called URL, which is just like date. It's built right into JavaScript. And then using that, we can console.log out our params.search params. The search params are known as what is after this question mark. They are also known as query params. So we come up here, or get params. We look in here and I'm like, that's not what I want. That's not giving me what I want. What I really want to do, just like local storage, is get a specific string. The string I want to get is the date. So I come back over to my JavaScript. Now I got my 666. that lines up with the date right here. Because I now have access to that, I can say const date ID is equal to my params, search params, and then get out the specific date that I'm looking for. Okay, that's half of it. I now have access to that URL, that number in my URL and in the search params. Now I need to go get my posts out. So what I do is I say, hey, all of my posts are going to come from a JSON.parse of my window.localstorage.getItem posts. And I want to make sure all of that is working. So I'm going to console log out my posts. Come over here. Now look what I have in my console. Hey, our good friend local storage gave us everything as a string right here. And then we did a combo step. Once we pulled that out of local storage, we then parsed it out. If that is a little complicated, this code is exactly the same as saying const posts as string is equal to our local storage, then take that string and parse it out into our array. And pause there, let you guys catch up because that is a lot of JavaScript. But want you guys to understand that if we take this item out, store it in the array, store it in a variable, and then use that variable right here, it is the same thing in JavaScript as just taking this whole thing, copying it, and putting it right in our parse. Let me start a poll just to see where
I
you
might be
guys are.
missing something just real quick. Should date ID be referenced somewhere?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, great.
Although it's a good idea to put a console login for date ID and make sure that that shows up in your console.
Okay.
All right, how we feeling? Feeling like getting the general flow here? Local storage, we're like, all right, new friend from yesterday, but we're getting the basic idea. Kind of weird that it only like strings, but that's okay. We're getting items, we're sending items, and we got a new friend URL, just like new friend date from yesterday. We're getting information into it, and then we're pulling information out like the date. And we know we console log out the date, and we got all of that. And we console log out the posts, and we got that. Now we run into a problem. What we need to do is use the date ID, which ends in 3666. We need to go inside our array, and we need to find where the date is equal to 666, or ending in 666. So we are going to use a new function that is built into newer versions of JavaScript, including all modern browsers, called .find. So we used .push before. We know how push works. We're now going to use a function called find. So we have access to all of the posts. Now we want to get the one singular post that lines up with whatever date ID is up here. So what we do is we say const post, the singular post is going to equal, go to our posts and find, and what we want to find is a post that we're searching for. We want to find a place where the search post dot date equals the date ID from up here. Okay. Whoa, what is that doing? .find, believe it or not, is a loop. What .find is going to do is it's going to loop over each post and give us access to that individual post in search post. That search post is going to represent the entire post in our array. So the first time this loop runs, the search post is going to equal this entire first object. If the date lines up, great. If it doesn't line up, then give us access to this entire next one. Okay, well, I said if the date lines up, how does it know the date is what we are looking for? What we do is we say search post, which is this whole object in here, pull out the date. And if this date lines up with this date ID here, then that's what our post is going to equal. So I come in here and I want to console log out my individual post. I save that, I come over here and I get undefined. And I'm like, well, that's not good. My date's there and I can look in my post array. I need to dive into that a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out my date ID and I take a look at that and I'm like, yeah, that's the number, right? That's what's coming in from up here. We should be all good. So I come back over here and I go, something's not right. I'm going to add a type of in there. I come back over here and I get type of string. Son of a, what the? My date up here is a number. It turns out that everything in this URL field has no idea what's a number and what's a string, so it just makes everything a string. We have two ways of solving that. We can either parse out our date ID here as an integer, or we can get a little sneaky here and go down to 2 equals. Now, when I log out my post and come over here, look what I get. I get that specific post that I'm looking for. So when we use a triple equals, we say find where the search post date is not only equal to the date ID, but we also check to make sure that the search post date, which is a number, lines up with the date ID data type, which happens to be a string because we're pulling it from the URL. However, if we use a double equal here, we say we don't care what kind of type you're comparing, as long as whatever this is matches up with whatever date ID is, regardless of the data type, you can match those two together. So we almost always want to use a triple equal unless we are very intentionally okay with matching data types that don't line up. Okay, we got our post here. Our post is an object over here. And we're like, wait a second. We know how to deal with objects. How do we get all of this object information to show up here?
Can loop over it and generate some HTML.
There's where you're wrong. We can generate out the HTML. Why don't we need to loop over it?
Oh, because it's already as a post.
It's already a singular object. We don't need to go over an array of all the posts. All we need to do is go over that singular post. We took care of that loop right here. That .find was going through and plucking out that individual post that we wanted. Now that
I
we
just have a quick question
on
the .find. Does that have to be used on an array?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're going to see another friend of .find come back in a couple minutes. But yes, .find has to be used on an array.
Like it can only be used on an array?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So like the array can have objects, and like so as we used it here, like we use the find to find an individual object in the array and access its key and values, but to iterate over the things, it has to be in an array.
Correct. Just like we can't use a for loop directly on an object, right? There's no way to loop over an entire object unless we tell it, we use something like .entries. For an array, we can loop over that because it's like, oh, you want each individual thing here. The same for a .find. The whole point of a .find is to find the item in the array that you're looking for. And there are other ways of finding an item in the array. We could write a for loop, right? That takes care of that. This .find is something that's built right into JavaScript. And if you're like, okay, you're using .find now, but I'm trying to do my capstone in 5 weeks and I can't find, I don't remember how .find works. You can always do a JS find. And the very first thing that comes up, MDM, second one is W3. And it gives you a whole breakdown of how we find a particular age in an array. Okay, so let's bring this all home. We're going to say let generated HTML. You know what? Yeah, we can do that. Equal an empty string. And then we are going to say, actually, we don't even need generated HTML. We're gonna do this a little different this time. We are going to say our const post content is going to come from document get element by ID, and the ID we are going to use is post content. But I come up here, and I don't have any post content going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new div ID equals post content. If you guys are following along, do not forget this step. This is the only HTML that we're adding. So we add in our post content, and then we say our post content dot inner HTML is going to equal, and then we're going to use a template literal. So our backticks, that's the button beneath escape or above tab. And from here, we can add in an H1 with the post.title. Womax, where's that post title coming in from? It's coming in from our find, which is coming in from our posts, which is coming in from our local storage. And this post, we know, is lining up, that date lines up with the date ID that's coming in from our search params. So we can also add in an H3 that has maybe the post.tagline. And finally, we can add in a p tag with our post.content. So I come over here and boom, ABC 123 content. Okay, that's pretty cool. But if I go back and I go to Happy December and click read more, boom, Happy December. It's that time of year. Now we've made one file called post.html that is going to work no matter how many posts I create. It is going to generate out the HTML for me based off of the date ID that is in the search params, and it's going to pull all of that information out of local storage. Pulling and breaking. We should finally see our ABC, our 123, and our content, or whatever content you have added in to your local storage.
I didn't get to do that last night. Is that in the index or the new HTML?
This is in post.html.
But we just made posts HTML.
Last night.
Oh, we did?
Hmm.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
We didn't put much in it. We just got post.html set up. We didn't add much code to it other than the HTML template boilerplate. Most of the code that we wrote on that is from tonight.
Okay. And where did the ABC content come from?
That is what I typed in for my new post. So that's actually a good question. Let's go through the whole flow. I can make a post like Thanksgiving is over. Death to fall. Let winter begin. JK, we don't get a fall in upstate New York. So I create my post. When I click post here, we're saving that information into local storage. Then our home page is using local storage to display a preview of the post. And then when we click read more, that date ID is getting passed in via the search parameters, which we are then able to pull out of our local storage and generate the HTML for right here.
Okay, so I still don't understand where you typed Thanksgiving is over. Just in your console or somewhere?
No,
on-
I went to new post and typed in the content right here.
in there. Okay.
Mine is not showing up.
Any errors in your console?
Just post stuff goes here.
Seriously, let's take a look. Did you remember to create your div ID post content?
Probably not.
You most certainly forgot. So we use a get element by ID post content right here. We need to make sure that we take this post stuff goes in here out and make a new div with an ID of post content.
Okay, so I make a new div.
Yep.
Post content.
No, an ID of post content.
Oh, ID.
And save and try it.
Yep. And this is it.
There you go.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, how are we feeling? Do we have any questions on this before we roll forward?
So I don't have this coming up on my web page.
Want to share your screen? Let's take a look. Okay, so let's look at your post.html because that's the page you're on in your web page in your browser. And scroll down a little bit to your script tag. Okay, everything looks right there. So let's go back to your, let me just remote control and let's take a look. Okay, so we come back over to your browser and we inspect and it says cannot read properties null reading find. So let's go back to your home page and your home page has an error at it on line 42. So we should start there.
Why is it like putting in my comments?
Because you're using this only works inside of JavaScript. HTML comments use the exclamation point dash dash. What we've got here. Semicolon expected. We have to have something wrong. The posts. Is it really not like your posts? Posts. I gotta be missing
She's
something.
saying let.
Oh, here we go. This should be an if. Thank you. Okay. So now let's go back over here and refresh. And now it says, oops.
Doesn't like the length.
Does not length the length on here. And that's because we are missing an else here. We say if there are stored posts, use stored posts and parse it out. Else, I'm just going to move your comment up here for you.
Okay.
Else, the posts should equal an empty array. So if we go back into Chrome, can you drag that window back over for me?
Huh. I had that in there. I don't know how I lost it.
Okay, so now we have no posts yet. That's okay. Let's make a new post and just do A, B, and C. I click post and it shows up here. Then if I click read more, it doesn't take me anywhere. So let's switch back over to your code. And in your code, this ahref needs to take you to the post page. And it's going to pass in the date from the post.date. So this is the routing information to this post page. This date is the information that's going to be used to tell it which post to show.
That makes sense.
So I'm going to come back over here to your Chrome. I'm going to refresh and I'm going to click on the read more button. And now that takes us to post with the proper date. So now we've got a problem. Document get element by ID is not a function on 36, but now we're in the post page. So we look at 36 and it says post content and you have your post content. Let me look at.
Is my ID?
Oh, it's a capital D.
So I need to change that.
Good catch. Now we come over here. Come on, switch on me. There we go. And you've got your post showing up.
Okay.
So if we take a step back and we test that with better content and we say Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween. I don't know why I'm on holidays all of a sudden, but We're here. Christmas, Thanksgiving, and we click on read more, and we get Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween. So you're all caught up.
Thank you.
Bobby, go ahead.
For some reason, my new posts are like posting to the top. Like when I like I can do new posts and to go in and like I'm gonna do it, but it won't actually like save
Share
basically.
screen. Let's take a look. The reason why we spend time debugging in class is not just so one student can get their stuff working. Debugging is as much as a skill as development is, right? So everyone should be paying attention for these errors to say, all right, if I get that error in the future, how do I fix that on my own? So you've got cannot set properties of null on index 57. So let's go to index line 57. And the problem is it is trying to get an element by ID posts. So go up and show me where your element is with an ID of posts.
Right
In
here.
your HTML.
Oh, my HTML.
Not there, is it?
No,
So where should the posts be showing up?
would it be stored posts?
We're trying to get your posts to show up in the HTML.
So it should be up here somewhere, right?
Should be on our div class row because we want the post to show up inside of that row.
So should it be? Oh shoot.
Right on the div class row, add an ID equal posts.
Yeah.
Save that and check it out in the browser. In other words, our JavaScript can't make our post show up unless we've got a link in our HTML to link the JavaScript to let the posts get put in there.
Yeah, here they are now, actually.
So now you've got to check your href in the HTML that you're generating and make sure that it's putting in a link to the post page as well as the post date. So compare your 51 to my href and you should have the next steps from there.
This is supposed to be in there.
I'm going to move on to our trail. Bobby, if you still need help afterwards, let me know.
Okay.
Or raise your hand again.
Yeah.
It's broken, Max.
Share your screen. Let's take a look.
All right, all right. So I'm trying to figure out where I'm going wrong with everything, and I have a feeling it might be half my lines 19 and 20. Everything else seemed to be lining up in other places, but I don't know. Where do you want me to go first?
Let me request remote and we'll get through it a little bit faster. So I always like to start at the beginning.
Okay.
Quote sound of music, the very best place to start. Okay, so we've got this working. That's a good sign, right? No errors on the home page.
Okay.
We go to new post. We have the post show up. I'm going to create one. No, I'm not. 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to hit the post button and we get 1, 2. We get the right content showing. So we've got 2 out of the 3 working. We've got the home page working and we've got a new post working. So that means the only place left to go wrong is if we click read more, we get all of this showing up. That's all working. So where did you think it was broken?
In the console log, it said about the title from the post HTML.
I don't see anything in your console.
It's gone now, but it was
Yeah,
there
I
before.
did see it was something about an error when you first pulled it up. It looks like null something, but I did see it, Archo.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's try this. We can go ghost hunting. In your new, oh, you said it was in post or in new?
It was in post. It was around line 30 something is where it said it. So it was around line 33. Like 33 is where it had the issue. And I thought I fixed it, but I couldn't get rid of it. So where it says H1 post.title, that's where it was showing up. It was the spelling error. I fixed it, but then like the error was still showing up for some reason. I had title spelled wrong.
Well, it's all working now,
Okay.
so I think you're good to go and all caught up.
All right.
If it
Thank you.
breaks mysteriously, come back.
Okay. Thank you.
I feel like you just saw a ghost and you think he's crazy.
A little bit.
I did see the error. I think it just hadn't updated.
Yeah, it 100% was there right when you switched it over to the screen because I tried to catch it and read it, but then you changed the screen and it moved and it was gone when you came back.
Yeah, there was some red down there.
I'm glad you guys saw it. I hit refresh and it wasn't changing. I guess I had to get rid of the post and then start over.
I think you're crazy and I'm the only one that matters.
We're gonna have to consult the video.
You're the red flag.
All right, how are we feeling? We feeling like we're understanding this? We want to bring this project home before we call it and go into the second half of class where you guys are going to actually control where we head next. Okay, let's finish this sucker off. So I'm in here and I'm like, all right, I got some legitimate content in here and I got my tests and it's annoying the crap out of me. We know we can do our window.location.clear down here and that deletes all of them, but there should really be two things. One, there should be a way to delete this post and just this post without having to delete all of them. And there should also be a way to get back to my homepage without having to hit the back button. Right. Normally we have a nav bar. We can click on the name of the website. It takes us back to the homepage. We're going to do it a little differently. So I'm going to go to my post. I'm going to make sure that I'm outside of my post content, because if I do it inside my post content, my JavaScript is going to overwrite the HTML inside of it. So I'm going to make sure that I'm still within my container div right here, but underneath my div ID post contents, I'm going to make a div there. And I'm going to have two links in here. So I'm going to use a span tag. Actually, no, I'm not. I lied. I'm going to use an ahref. It's going to go to my home page and it's going to say the word home. So I go over to my browser. I get my nice little home button here. I can click on that. It takes me home. I go to my test one. I click read more. I get that back. Nice, simple, one line, ahref, nice functionality for the end user. Don't get lost in div soup. Make sure that you're inside your container, but outside your post content, and you should be good to go. The other thing we want to do is we would like to delete a post. So I'm going to add a vertical bar there to separate out the links. That is on the same key as the /. So if you do shift and then the key underneath delete and above return, you get that vertical bar. It's the vertical bar we also use for the OR operator, just a visual thing to space it out. And I'm going to add a span on this with the word delete. And I come over here and I have my word delete. And we're going to hook up some JavaScript to this. But I want to make sure that this is a link. It looks like a link. And you're not really supposed to use you're not supposed to use A tags or anchor tags without an href. And we're not really going to do an href here. We're going to do an on-click here. So it is preferred to use a span tag, but because of that, we've got to add some styling to it. So I'm going to do some inline styling here. And I'm going to say the color is going to be red. the text decoration is going to be underline. And I come over here and now it's looking right. But notice when I hover over my home, I get that nice cursor. And when I come over to delete, I got a highlight. I don't want the highlight. I want it to be a cursor. I want people to know they can click on it. So all we need to do is add a cursor spelled correctly. And the cursor we want is the pointer. I come over here and hover, and now I get my little hand. Quick little CSS, it's all the CSS we're doing, but those little things make that UI difference. Oh, that's underline. Oh, the color's red. That means delete, danger. Oh, the cursor is a pointer. That means I can click on it. Now, we could use Bootstrap buttons there if we really wanted to, but quick link, not really encouraging people to delete it. So we use the link. You could use a button. Either would work perfectly fine. Okay, now we got to make our delete work here. So just like we added a style tag, we're also going to add an on-click tag. And our on-click is going to go to the delete post function and give us access to the event when it happens. And then we've got to define what's our delete post do. How does that work? So we're going to finish up here with some JavaScript. We've got all of this that's showing the content, but what we really need to do is add a new function called delete post. That takes the event. And then general good rule of thumb is before we delete anything, we ask the user to confirm it. So there are all different ways of doing this, but one shortcut that I really love, we've used alert before. Now we're going to use window.confirm. And what we are going to confirm, it's asking for a message. So we are going to say, are you sure you really want to delete this post? And in here, we can add a console.log. Yes, delete baby. And we can do an else and say console.log. They hit cancel. Don't go nuts on those console logs. We're going to take those out or comment them out in a second. But just to show you how this window.confirm works, we come over to the browser, we click our delete button, and we say, are you sure you really want to delete this post? If they hit OK on that, we get yes, delete baby. That means whatever code is in this if statement is going to execute. And if we click delete again and hit the little cancel, we get they hit cancel. Okay, so we got our confirm working. That's nice. We know we need to be inside this if block because we don't really do anything if they hit cancel. We just take them back to the post. I'm going to just comment that out and this out. How do we delete the post?
I would think we start with finding a way to remove it from local storage.
We need to remove it from local storage. We actually have access to the posts already. We have access to this post array that we pulled out from local storage and parsed out. So we have access to the array down here. How do we go about removing it from the array?
I know this, but I don't remember.
Can we use find again?
Well, we can use find, but what's the actual function to remove it from the array?
Is it a
Dig
pop
deep into
or-
your free code camp.
On shift.
We pop it?
Shift.
It is splice.
Slice.
Slice is the easiest way to remove items from the array. So if you didn't know that, JS remove specific element from array, and Stack Overflow with, yes, that is 11,000 upvotes, says that you can use splice.
Hmm.
Okay, that's cool, but look at what splice requires. It requires the index of the item that we want to remove. Well, what we did here is we did a find, but that gave us the post, the whole post object. We don't want the post object. We need to know the index of that post to remove that specific one. Well, believe it or not, it is as simple as copying this line and changing this to index. Because find is not only a function that is built into arrays, find index is also a function that is built into all arrays. So if we console log this out, before we go getting delete happy, let's make sure that this is working.
Console.
Why there is not autocorrect in VS Code, I will never know. You know how many times I misspelled console in my life? If I had a penny. Okay, so let's see if this is working. I go to my homepage. This is the first post that I made. So I go to read more. I click on delete. I say, yes, I really want to delete it. And I get 0 out. Okay, that makes sense. It's an array. It's 0 index. I go back to my homepage. 0, 1, 2, 3. If I go to this one and hit delete and okay, I get 3 out. Okay, cool. So let me go back to Stack Overflow. And Stack Overflow says take the array, splice it, and then this other parameter is actually set up in the comments. It says second parameter means remove one item only. Splice is actually set up to start at whatever index you would like and delete multiple indexes after it. But because we just want to delete that one item, we're going to use 1. So I say, go to my posts and splice out the post index that we found by going through our array and lining up the date ID, and then only splice out one thing, only delete that one item that we would like to remove.
So we're using splice because it gives you control over what you want to remove versus like pop or whatever.
Correct.
Like it seems it's, if anything, I would say it's more efficient too. Whereas because the other ones like pop and stuff, don't you have to store them in another array or things? This is like right to the point.
Pop is only going to remove the last item in the array. We need splice to remove the specific item that we're trying to delete, because we don't want to just remove the last thing in the array. We want to remove a specific index. So that's why we can't use pop or unshift. Pop does the last item, unshift does the first item. Splice is what, if you think about the entire array, we're going into the array and cutting out that item. We're splicing that item out of it. If you think about an array as like film of taking a cut, that's what we're splicing out.
I wish they taught us that. That feels like you said, a lot more efficient than the other ones. A lot more control.
I would be lying if I said I didn't look that up when I did this blog project yesterday. I can never remember which array method to use. Okay.
And another thing is, I know there was one thing to know.
Ahead.
Some of the other array functions will change the array. Like this one, we want to keep the original array just minus whatever we took.
Yes, and that is a very good thing to note. Sometimes the array function will return out the value that you're trying to modify. And sometimes it gives you the value itself or the new array. So .splice is good to know that splice does modify this original array. Okay, so I come over here. I'm in my post. I hit delete. I hit OK. And I'm like, okay, I think that worked. I go to my home page. It's still there. Well, that's annoying. Let's debug. I'm going to add my console log in my posts, and I'm going to also log it out right beforehand to see what the difference is between the two of them. So I go to my Thanksgiving is open over. I hit my delete. I hit OK. I have 4 items in my array, and now I have 3 items in my array. I open that up, and my Thanksgiving is over disappeared. When my splice is working, I go back to my home page, it's still there. I refresh, it's still there. What's the last step, second to last step we need to do to make our delete work?
Update the HTML.
So close. What does the HTML get generated off of?
The posts.
HTML?
Which comes from
Local storage.
exactly. And where did we update local storage after we deleted that posts array? We didn't. We updated posts, but posts is just this variable right here. Notice that in our new, when we made the post and we pushed it in, we had to set that posts array back into local storage. So we could actually take both of these lines of code and put them right in here. So we did the post splice that took the post out. Finally, we take our posts array, which is now missing the post that we deleted as we want it to. We set it into local storage, and then we redirect the user back to the home page. So little code cleanup. I'm going to take out my console logs here because we don't need them. Just use them for debugging. I go back over, I go to my test 1, I hit the delete button, I hit OK on that, and it's gone. A couple minutes over, I'm going to re-poll you guys to make sure that's all working, and then we'll go on break and extend it a little bit for you guys. You got it working, you can go on break. We will be back at either 7:30 or 7:35, depending on if anyone has questions.
I don't have mine working.
You want to share a screen?
Sure.
Do we have an error in the console? Oh, I got your problem. Go back to your code. You do all of the work to find the index, but then you store it in a const called post, and then you use post index to slice it out. So this up here should be post index.
Oh, this right here?
Yep.
Okay.
There you go. See if that fixes it.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'm having an issue too. Yeah, I think I missed a couple of steps just before break, but I was still seeing like an error I was trying to work on.
Share the screen. Let's take a look.
Oh,
Okay, scroll up in your console a little bit so I can see your error.
this one.
Yeah.
120. Yeah, so it was saying that like the error is like around here.
Let me request remote. So here it's saying delete post is not defined.
Oh, okay.
That means that down here it lies. Const delete post. Is this just a refresh issue? Cannot read properties of undefined reading title. So that means up here.
Yeah, where the issue was at first, it was pointing me to at first, but like I wasn't sure how to fix that.
So title. So let's look at your new, and your new. Oh, that uses the title. Search post date. The date is getting properly set in. You're using date now. Post says string, pull it out. Search post by the date, and if it equals the date ID. Okay, and you're console logging out the post, but it's undefined here. So that means this search isn't working. Let's console log out your posts and see what's in there. So we go up to the error, we take a look, and inside there are your posts with the titles, tagline, content, and the date, as we would expect. Do we get your date ID properly? Date ID. Aha, there's the problem. So we added that on 36, and on 36, we're getting null. So this date ID isn't coming out because you're going to really hate yourself. You have a window comma location instead of a window dot location.
So close. Okay. All right, there it is.
So that's a good example of, even though it was a syntax error, I didn't see that until I started console logging things out, right? Until I started getting to the point of going, okay, we're not getting the post right. Why aren't we getting the post? Okay, what's the post find based off of? Well, all of your posts are good. Okay, well, if all the posts are good, then let's check the date ID. Date ID isn't working. Where are we getting that from?
Okay. All right, thank you so much. That was driving me crazy.
Now let's see if we delete and okay, and go back to the home page. Nope, still not deleting.
Yeah, there was a couple steps that you did before that I didn't get to yet.
Okay. Yeah, so you just need to do your local storage there, and then you'll be good to go.
Okay. All right, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
I'm trying to delete the comments that are showing up on my webpage. I can't find them, so I went into inspect. Is there a way to look in inspect and ask it for the line number?
Not the line number. I don't think so.
No? Will it say if it's my index or my new or my post?
Well, whatever your file name is in your URL is what file it's on.
Okay, I don't understand.
Okay, so look in your browser, look at the top. It's going to say 127.0.0.1/ and then whatever page you're on. So if the comment is showing up in that page, that's what file it is in.
Oh, no, there's no slash. It's 001:5500.
So that means it would be in your index.
Okay.
Bobby, go ahead.
So in my browser, for some reason, it's like the actual post itself isn't showing up. I'm getting the home and delete buttons, but when I click read more, like the post itself isn't showing up.
Go ahead, share your screen.
Yeah, I know I'm a little like behind on the code because I was trying to figure out why it wasn't showing up. But
Okay, so the first thing I notice is your date is a little funky up here. You've got this date %20 and then another %20. That normally means there is an issue with where we do that. So let's go to your index, and here you've got some spaces here that shouldn't be there. So that would break it because it doesn't know what it's linking to because of that space. So let's try and pop one of these open. And now we've got search post is not defined. Nope. Why is that not? Refresh, PBC. Okay, there we go. Search post is not defined on 35. That's mine. I want yours. Okay, so we go to post, we look at 35, and you're using search post here. That means you also have to use search post here.
okay.
Now it says cannot access post content before initialization. We do that in here, but it doesn't know that doesn't feel right.
There's no quotes around post content.
Thank you. Doug, you are getting better at this than I am. Okay, so post content, we need that to link to the ID up here. So
Okay.
that's why we're not using the variable post content. We're saying no, the thing is actually called post content.
Okay, yeah.
And you're all good to go.
Cool. Thank you.
Artrell, you're up.
Thanks. All right. It's broken again somewhere, I think. And my console log, I'm getting, oh, let me share my screen
Yep.
because it's not easier that way. Lower my hand, share screen, to share. Okay, before we click on anything, you see my error, right, Max? There's no ghosts.
I don't know what you're talking about, Artrell. Okay, so first thing I noticed is we've got red going on over here. That means that normally when it's at the end of the file, we've got a missing curly brace somewhere.
Yeah, so
So-
45 is weird.
45.
Line 45.
You're good here. You're telling it to, oh, yeah, you're good here. You're telling it, hey, I start this function called delete post. I have my if statement that ends down here. Then I've got my else statement that ends down here. But where does my delete post end?
I thought that was
supposed
58.
to end here, but we didn't end the else.
Okay. It was that easy.
That
Son of a-
easy.
I'm like, oh, your lines are loaded up.
And it looks like your delete is working. Well, your code looks like you've got everything in there. So if you delete, you've got a post find index is not a function because we're not looking at a singular post. We're looking at all the posts to find the one post that we're going to delete. So let's try that again. Delete. Okay. And it's gone.
Okay. Thank you, Max.
No problem. Good work.
What time do we come back?
Let's say 7:40.
Okay.
Give everyone a little bit longer of a break.
All right. Thank you.
Max, I have a quick question.
Yep.
Does local storage persist if you quit your browser and restart it, or does that
It
flush
does.
It does. Okay.
It does, although, let me pause the recording so I'm not. Welcome back, everyone. All right. Believe it or not, you have survived the gauntlet of JavaScript projects. You have made it to the end of the JavaScript module. I've got nothing more for you. So what we're going to spend the last couple minutes of class on is any concepts, anything in Free Code Camp that you would like me to go over on the fly, any piece of our previous projects that you would like to talk through, anything that you would be interested to see how I solve it using JavaScript, anything, basically open office hours for any questions. We will have office hours Sunday at 5, but just want to give you guys an opportunity in the last couple minutes of the JavaScript module to ask any concepts for review or any questions you may have.
I still feel foggy when I'm like trying to do JavaScript, like I don't know what I'm doing. I plan on going through the whole section again in Free Code Academy. Do you think that would help?
Free Code Camp is great for breaking it down and being like, all right, I don't get functions. Like, let me go practice with my functions and make sure I understand it. The hard thing to learn in JavaScript is like, okay, I got everything in Free Code Camp. I get how everything works. How do I know to do that? Right? How do I know to use an onClick? How do I know that onClick needs a function? How do I know that function needs to update the HTML, right? And that's a really hard thing to practice with, and where I think projects come in most helpful, right? So saying like, all right, I don't really know how to practice with the function, but if you set out and to do a project, then it becomes easier to say, okay, I want to I want to, you know, what's the first thing the user needs to see? Okay, I need to go build that. Now, when they click on this thing, what's supposed to happen? Oh, that's some JavaScript. Let me think through that, right? So you can't really get practice with getting better at knowing what JavaScript to write unless you have some end goal in mind and you start using that to convert the user should be able to do this into here is the code that lets the user do that.
So I have a question for you. Would you recommend like us writing down the steps that we would need to take prior to starting the code? Like what exactly, like the step-by-step direction or yeah, step-by-step plan for us to complete a code?
Good question. So I will answer that on both sides of saying you shouldn't be writing down step by step to say like, well, on this project, on the blog project, we needed to show the post. So if I write down these steps, that means I can, and if I write down the instructions well enough, I can take those onto any project. And it's like, well, that's not the case, right? Like every project is going to be unique, is going to need different pages, is going to need different data structures, is going to need, you know, different JavaScript, is going to need different HTML. Like you never get to the point where you can say like, oh, I've got 100 pages worth of instructions. And now that I have that, I can build any web application. Unfortunately, it never gets to that level. However, the flip side of that is you should definitely be doing your planning, right? You should definitely be saying, hey, based off of this wireframe, what should the user be able to do on this page? Oh, the home page is showing, you know, what dogs are available for adoption, or the home page is showing whatever information is on there. I need to break that up and say, hey, this is going to need a for loop. It's going to run when the page first loads. It's going to go over an array to show that information. And it's going to generate the JavaScript or the HTML, right? Like doing your planning is a good idea. What isn't a good idea is saying like, let me break this down to such a step-by-step level that I'll have it all planned out so well that when I get into the code, it's really easy for me to break out. That's going a little overboard on the planning, but what you do want to do in the planning step is saying, okay, what do I need to, what does the user need to be able to do in order for this page to work. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it makes sense. So think of the end user when you are making the plans.
Yeah, and other developers may answer that differently, but for me, the easiest part, the hardest part to get over is like that initial, well, where do I start? Right? And if you think about, well, what should the user see? Let me go build all of that out. Okay, now that the user can see that, what JavaScript do they need to do the first interaction on my website? Whether that's submitting a contact form, whether that's being able to add a new piece of information, whatever that is, that's where you can get your practice. If you think about, well, if the user clicks on this, how do I pull that off?
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions? I apologize, by the way, if I was yelling at any of you the first half of class. I was so congested that I could not hear my own voice. So I apologize.
You were not. I didn't think so.
So this is, you can ask any questions, even if you're like, all right, I still don't get the difference between const and let, and I can do a quick code sample on that. Or, hey, there are a bunch of array methods. Can you go through a couple of those? Or use this time to review any of the projects we've done, movie seats, tic-tac-toe.
Actually, difference between for and while loops. I still tripped up on those.
Sure. So we use a for loop whenever we know how many times that loop is going to run. We use a while loop when we're kind of uncertain when that's going to run. So a for loop, let me pull up a new file here and share my screen. So we use a for loop whenever we've got a defined number of times it wants to run. Two primary kinds of for loops that we'll use the most are a for of, and then your old school for let. So if we've got some array of animals, and it's a dog, a cat, and an elephant, we know how many times this loop is going to run. We know this loop is going to run 3 times. So we're going to use a for loop, and that for loop is going to give us access to each individual animal of all of the animals. So if we console log out our animal, we get our dog, our cat, and our elephant. Because this loop is running 3 times, it's getting access to each individual animal. First animal is equal to dog, next it's equal to cat, then it's equal to elephant. So every time we hit this curly brace and we go back up to our loop, we're pulling in the next item and putting it into our for loop. Now, we could achieve the exact same thing by saying let I equal 0. That's our incrementer. That's saying, okay, how many times does this loop run? While I is less than animals.length. Okay, what's our animals.length? 1, 2, 3. So that's going to run 3 times. I plus plus. And then we console log out our animal. We go to the list and we use I to get access to the animal. So I save that. Now I get dog, cat, elephant, dog, cat, elephant. This for loop and this for loop is doing the exact same thing. The only difference is we're manually specifying at what index should the loop start, how should the loop be incremented every time it runs, and how many times should this loop run? Or, in other words, if this statement is still true, should the loop keep running? So we can actually come in here to make it a little bit more clear and log out I. And what we're going to see is 0, 1, and 2. because the first time this loop runs, it starts at 0. It goes to animals, and I is 0, so it pulls out dog, and it console logs that out. Then we hit this curly brace here, and it goes back up, and it says I++. That means I is now equal to 1. We log out 1, and then we go get the first index, which is cat, and log that out. While loops are a lot less frequent. While loops happen when you don't know how many times the while loop is going to run. Let me see if there is a so maybe a good example of this is like let let's say let counter equal 0. And then we can say something like while counter is less than 100, console log the counter, then add 10 to the counter. So we don't really know how many times this loop is going to run. We can trace through it and figure out that it's actually going to run 10 times. And we know that because if we do our node test, we see 0 through 90 getting printed out. Basically, what we're doing is we're saying while counter is less than 100. We start at 0. 0 is less than 100, so we log out 0. Then we add 10 onto the counter. Counter is now 10. 10 is less than 100, so we log out 10. Add another 10 onto it. Counter is now 20. We go all the way through until counter is 90. We log that out. 100 is not less than 100. It's less than or equal to. So we stop running this loop. So while loops are, I don't want to say are rarely used. You definitely can see it in the code, but you only use a while loop when the code that's executing is determining whether or not the loop should run another time. The code in here, because we're adding 10 to it, is affecting whether or not this code loop continues to run, which is why we use a while loop here. Now we could write this as a for let counter let loop counter equal 0 while loop counter is less than 100, loop counter plus 10. And then we say console.log loop counter. And just gonna comment this one out. Oh no, we got an infinite loop. Plus equal 10. Oh god, it's been so long since I've written a for loop. There we go. So we achieve that exact same output with a for loop here. The only difference is instead of running this loop and incrementing by 1 every time, which is the most common, we incremented by 10 here. But this is it's like an if statement or a switch statement. You can achieve the exact same output with both of them. Just for loops tend to be a little bit easier to use and a little bit harder to get stuck in an infinite loop, like I just did right here. So 2 different ways of doing it. These achieve the exact same thing. Just a matter of saying which one is more readable and then going from there. Artrell, go ahead.
If you were adding 1 in that for loop, why is it still an infinite loop? Shouldn't it have added 1?
I wasn't adding 1. I was adding 10 and then not setting it into loop counter.
No, but before you did it, to add 10, didn't you have it add 1? Or did I miss that?
No, I had this is what I had before.
Okay.
And what's happening is it's adding 10, but then it's not storing it into loop counter. So what I need to do is either say loop counter equals loop counter plus 10, or the shorthand for this is saying tape loop counter and add 10 to it and store it back into loop counter.
Because there was equal sign present in that part of the sentence.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, what I had, it doesn't matter if this is 1 or 10. The problem was I was missing that equal. So I was adding 10 to loop counter, but then not saving the additional 10 into the loop counter itself.
Got it.
Max, what if in your while loop, if you said if math random is smaller than 0.5, add 10?
Oh yeah, we could do that. That's a great idea. So here, let me comment this one out. When we run the code, math.random always returns a number between 1 and 0. And if you're like, well, that's not helpful. Well, it's returning a decimal number between 1 and 0. So a good way to say, hey, this code will run 50% of the time, roughly, because it's all random. We put in a is less than 0.5. So half the time that will be true, the other half it won't, but it's all random, so it could run a couple times. So the first 3 times that for loop ran, the math.random was not greater than 0.5. So it didn't add it on. But the 4th time the loop ran, it was greater than 0.5, so it added a 10 on. Then it took 3 more random numbers to get to the 20. And then the next random number, when it was at 20, was greater than 0.5. So we only got 20 once. So this is a good example of, we don't know how many times this while loop is going to run. But we do know that the conditions inside the while loop are going to change whether or not the code will run again. And that is a great example of a good while loop. The other time that you use
that's
while
good.
loops other than random is a lot with times. So you may say, keep this loop running while 5 seconds hasn't passed. And once 5 seconds has passed, stop checking something.
Can I share my screen real quick?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, thank you. It's a question having to do with arrays and somewhat nested. Got that. Can you see it?
You're
Can you
good.
see it?
Yeah, you're
Okay.
good.
So I just had a question regarding can something share the same list? Like over here is trees and log, and they share the same list. And I try to call them, and it didn't really go too well. So is that
Okay,
just not?
so let's break this down. Is this valid is giving you the whole object right here, or the whole array right there. Then we narrow in on the 0, which is saying I'm going to get this whole object in here. Then you grab the type, which is this right here. And then you grab index 1 from the type, which is going to be the log right here.
Right.
So we got to stop here because there's no further we can go in.
Why?
Because we made it down to the log. So where is the list inside the log?
You're right. Okay. So I have to tell it to go into the list. I thought that's what I did with saying list and then trying to
So
pull.
you're trying to pull the type and the list at the same time. The list isn't inside the type.
Gotcha.
So you could pull the type bracket 1, or you could say, is this valid 0? Take this out and get just the list bracket 1, which would give you the pine. But you can't say, hey, go get me the type 1, which is log, and then also get me the list 1. Every time you do a dot, you're going deeper in another layer deep.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Great question. Whenever we do a dot or that bracket notation, right, we're saying, hey, let's go inside of that item. But if we are trying to get access to 2 pieces of it, we have to do 2 separate console logs there, right? Or 2 different variables to get out the 2 pieces of information.
Bloop. Oh, wait. Muted.
Other questions?
I want to open up free code camp.
Go for it. Good idea.
I probably would have been a little further along, but I kept getting stuck on these. I would, the answers and solutions would make sense, but then I'd go back to do it and I wasn't doing it right. So I was hoping we could go through this one. It is, let me share my screen. Are you seeing it?
Yes. Okay, so it's saying if else statements can be chained together for complex logic, and then they're saying this is the pseudocode, right? So they're saying that's not the actual final syntax that you're supposed to use. This is just the example of showing you how we chain the things together. So they're saying write chain if else statements to fulfill the following conditions. If num5 is less than 5, return tiny. Do you want it to try and type it out, or do you want me to do it?
Well, so what I had done here was if test size.
So you're using recursion there, and I don't think you mean to be doing that. So
No.
let's take a step back. What happens, I'm going to take us back to the beginning. The way this is flowing is the computer says, hey, this is a function here. I'm going to ignore that function until you tell me to run it. Then I come down and it says test size. I know how to run test size because that's the name of a function. Then I'm going to take whatever the arguments are right here and pass it in to the num right here. So that means that whenever we do in here, num is going to equal 7. Okay, so test size is saying go run the code between this square bracket and this square bracket. What we say is we take the 7 here, and that is going to go into the variable called num. So if we do something like console log num, what we'll see is it is equal to 7. That is because when we call the function, it is equal to 7. If we call that function another time and make it equal to 100, we get 7 and 100 out. That's because the first time the function runs, the argument between the parentheses is getting passed into the num up here. That means that the next time this runs, 100 is going to be the num, and that's why we console log that out and get that here. So what we need to do is use that num to return out different values.
So console.log num less than 5.
We need a if num is less than 5, And they don't want you to log it, they want you to return it. So we're in here, we're going to say if num is less than 5, return tiny.
Okay, so that's what I was gonna do when I started, but I was writing it wrong.
So we have to use the parameter that they define up here, because otherwise it's going to be like, I don't know what num is. What if statements are you trying to compare it to? So that's where we say, hey, whatever number is in the parameters here is going to come in here. So then we start chaining it and we say, else if the num
It's greater than 10 or less than 10.
is less than 10. Yep. Return small.
So I was started it off wrong, but the next thing I was gonna write was if num was less than 5.
Medium,
Shoot.
and we can just copy the last two here, right?
Mhm.
Num is less than 20, and then greater than or equal, and large and huge. And then to test if this is working, oops, I forgot my 25 there, 20. We can actually change what's going on in here. So if we say, because this is getting returned out, we can console log our test size 3, and we get tiny. And then if we say 30, we get huge.
Mhm.
And it would help if I put my semicolons in the right spot. So what's happening is we call test size. It comes up to this function. The 30 comes in, and that's what num is going to be. Num is not less than 5. It's not less than 10. It gets all the way down here. And it goes, oh, num is greater than or equal to 20. So I'm going to return. What does the return mean? That means that wherever I called this whole function, this is now going to equal the word huge. And then I console log out huge. Right, so basically we, just like with the template literal, how we replace anything in the $ curly braces, when the computer actually executes this code, the huge is going to be what's returned, and then that's what we console log out. So the return is basically returning the output of the function back to the place it got called.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I don't know why I got it wrong. But sometimes it's like a simple thing. The return change me, that messes me up every time. I'm like, what do you mean you want me to change you?
So you can just delete that if it messes you up, and
What does it do?
that will still pass.
Is it just saying,
It's just giving you some code in there so that you know where to change.
huh, okay. All right. Counting cards. Maybe I don't understand.
Before we dive into this one, anyone else have a question? Happy to answer this. Just want to make sure everyone has a chance.
Of course.
Nah, I was struggling on counting cards too. It
Good.
went through.
Okay, so you all know I hate switch statements, but it is important to know almost every aspect of the language or the basics of the language, and switch statements definitely count. Okay, so what they're saying is if the card is a 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, which you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, you add 1 to the count. Okay, if it is a 10, or any of the face cards, you minus 1 from the count, and then you can ignore 7, 8, and 9 because they don't change the count. So based off of that, your switch statement here looks right to me. You're handling the cases, you ignore the ones that don't need a count change. Then you say, hold bet, hold. If the count is greater than 0, hold bet, you change the bet. Well, let's just run it and see where you're at. Okay, so they're saying your function should return a value for count and the text bet or hold with 1 character space between them. So you are returning your function should return a value for the count and the text bet or hold with 1 space between them. You're doing that. Or
See, I don't understand a lot of this because I'm just caught up in the whole, I don't understand what the card.
It looks like the function is being declared twice. At the top.
Oh, it is, and we ended up with 2 counts instead of just 1. And is the count, I don't know if the count's supposed to be in it or no, count would have to be outside of it. But nothing is passing. That lines up with that. You've got your switch, you've got your brakes. Hold bet if the count is greater. Do not reset count to 0 when the value is 7, 8, or 9. Do not return an array. Do not include quotes in the output. Oh, we've got a syntax error on 35, an extra curly brace. And then CC is not a function. What do you mean it's not a function? It's right there. Sometimes it needs a refresh. Syntax error on 35. I fixed that though. Oh, here. This is wrong. Okay. So here's where you're at. You actually had all of this code right in here. The problem is you had an extra function up here and you had your count hanging out inside the function. If the count is hanging out inside the function, every time the function runs, it's going to reset the count to 0. We don't want it to do that because what we're basically doing is we're saying, hey, the first time we call your card counting function, CC, the card is a 2. That means we add 1 to the count. Now the next card is a 3. Because it is a 3, we add 1 to the count. Count is now 2. Then we call the function again, and it's a 7. So we don't do anything to the count. Count is still 2. Okay. Now we have a king card. We subtract 1 from the count. Count is now 1. And then we have our ace card. Count gets subtracted 1 more time. We get the 10.
No. No, like that doesn't make sense to me because I'm mixing numbers and letters.
So that's how card counting works in betting, right? And so they're trying to give you an example here to say, hey, keep track of all of this. So if we add a console log in here, we can say something like let's say card is card output is that. So what they're saying is the card is a 2. We start at 0. The card is a 2. So output 1 and bet. Okay, now if the next card coming in is a 3, the output is 2. So still bet on that. Now we got a 7. The output still is 2. We bet.
Why is the output put 2 for a 7?
Because we're playing blackjack. So we're trying to get to 21.
So that's probably messing me up.
So 2 plus 3 plus 7 is still under 21. So we continue to bet.
Okay, is there another way we can write this without that?
Schneider, did you have something?
I was just saying, I'm thinking knowing the rules of the game would help you be less confused.
Yeah. So what it's saying in over here is that you're trying to get to 21 and you don't want to go over 21 because then you lose. And so what we're doing is we're keeping track of whether or not we should continue to bet based off of the cards we've been dealt here. And the way we do that is by adding 1 or subtracting 1 based off of what card was dealt.
This is not a good example for me.
So the more important thing on this is not understanding what we're trying to accomplish, but what the computer is executing. Right? So regardless of the output here, we should be able to look at this and say, hey, CC is 2. So the first time this runs, card is equal to 2. We go through this switch statement. We find case 2. So count gets added. Count becomes 1. Then we break out of the switch. So we come out of that. Then we say count is 1 right now because we added to it. So this is true. So what is going to output is 1 and the word bet. Right? Even if we know nothing about the rules of blackjack, we should be able to read this code and trace through what the output of this is going to be. And so if we look here, 1 bet is what got outputted.
Okay, and I started to follow you until we got to the bar.
Okay, so so right here at this point, the computer is like count is now equal to 1.
Right.
Right? Because we added to it. So now it says, all right, hold bet. I'm going to keep hold in my memory. Now is 1 greater than 0?
Yes.
Okay, so we take whatever was in hold bet and we overwrite it and we put the word bet in hold bet. So hold bet is now equal to the word bet. At the end of this line, what was hold bet equal to?
Hold.
Yes. At the end of right here, what was hold bet equal to?
Well, above it, it's bet.
Right, but why is it bet?
I don't know.
Because 1 is greater than 0. What did we say the count was right here? The count is 1.
Yeah. This is not.
1 is greater than 0.
Yeah.
So we take the word bet and we store it in hold bet. Whatever's on the right side of the equal is going to go into the left side of the variable.
Okay.
And this only happens because the count, which is 1, is greater than 0.
Okay.
So when we come down here and we return something out, we said the count was 1. And now what is hold bet equal to?
Bet.
Yes. And so what we output is 1 and bet.
The count is equal to 1. Because it's. Okay.
Because the card was a 2. Now, the next time this runs, we got a 3 as the card. So we come up here and we make the card equals 3. We go into the switch statement, we hit case 3, we add 1 to the count. The count is declared out here, so the count is now equal to 1.
4.
So we add 1 to it, and right here, the count is now equal to 2.
Oh, so case 3 is not a number I'm supposed to be working with. It's just a label.
Card is 3. So we go into the switch statement and we use the card number to line 3 up with the case 3 right here. That means that we need to add 1 to the count.
You're not adding the card number or the count number, you're adding just 1 to the count. If you look at
Correct.
the example on the side, you're not adding the numbers of the cards.
So
We're
how-
saying if the
it's-
card is 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, doesn't matter which one of them is, if it's any one of those cards, then we add 1 to the count.
Okay, so the count is always 0 until, oh, look, the card's a 4, add 1. And then it's a 1.
And then count is 1, yes. And then we get the next card, and the card's a 6. So then we add 1 to the count. Now the count is 2. Now we get a card that's an ace. Well, an ace, we subtract 1. So now the count is 1.
Okay, so now I have to figure that part again. It started to make sense.
Think of the count changing the cards as like the key, the +1. It ain't just add the 1 to the 2, 3, 4, etc. Subtract 1 to the J, whatever. Like on the left side, that pretty much tells you what to do.
It started to make sense up above. I'm gonna hold on to that part for now.
Okay.
Yeah, and try to forget the letters. Okay,
Right. Basically, we're saying any of these cards are high cards. So if you think of the Joker as or the Jack as an 11, the Queen as a 12, the King as a 13, and the Ace is a 14, that may help. If they're low cards, we add to the count. If they are high cards, we subtract from the count. If they're middle cards, we don't do anything to the count.
okay. So if we draw a Jack, we're supposed to decrease the count by 1.
Yep.
But if the count's already 0 and we decrease it by 1,
Your count goes negative, and that's okay.
okay. Okay. And the count, if the count is greater than 0,
We continue to bet. In other words, we keep on saying, give us another card.
but
But if it's
not.
negative, we say hold. Yes.
All right. I'm sorry, everybody.
No need to apologize. This is a good thing to say. Do I understand what they want me to do? Because if you can't understand the premise of what they want you to do in English, you're never going to get it in your programming, right?
Mhm.
So this is a situation where you really want to say, do I understand what's happening? Do I understand could I figure out what the card count was if they gave me a 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Can I understand where that 5 bet is coming from? Because if I can't, I'm probably not going to be able to code that out. So based off of the instructions up here, we want to make sure that we understand how to get to 5 bet. And once we do that, it becomes easier to get that to happen in our code.
Got it. I'm gonna have to practice this one. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna do that again. I'll probably ask you about it tomorrow.
No
Or-
problem. Other questions? We have a couple minutes left.
What was the homework for this week?
I have not posted it yet. It will be going through, so I will post both last week's homework and this week's homework. Last week's homework is going to be going through all of the tic-tac-toe code and adding comments to all of that. Hey, how is this, what does this line of code do? What are we telling the computer? This week's homework is going to be going through the blog project and just numbering the order of the code. So we're going to start and you're going to say, okay, this HTML shows all the posts. Then you're going to go in and add, and that's going to be number 1. Then you go, okay, what happens next? The JavaScript, that's number 2. Okay, now we click on the new post button. That's the A tag, that's number 3. Where does that take us? That takes us to the new page. You're going to switch over to that HTML and add in a little comment that says number 4. And we're going to go through all the way, thinking through, how do I see my homepage? How does that show up on the homepage? How do I make a new post? How do I click on a post and go from there? So I'll have instructions in that assignment.
We're technically commenting it as you
The order that the computer runs it as if you were creating a new post and clicking into it. Yes.
Okay.
So what I'll say is, you know, a user loads the page, a user clicks the new post button, the user fills out the form and clicks the submit or the post button, the user clicks on read more, and the user lands on the post page, right? And with those 5 simple steps, you're going to find there are probably 25, 30 different things that run in different order to make all of that pull off. So the first one will be just going through tic-tac-toe and just adding comments about what it's doing. The order doesn't matter. And then on the other assignment, you don't need to comment it out. If you want to, if that helps you understand it, great. What I want you to comment out is the order that it runs. 2 different levels of understanding there, but important to have both of them. Any final questions for tonight?
Yeah, when we're doing stuff with Ryan, is it web stuff, coding stuff? Like
Yep. You're still going to be in JavaScript. You're still going to be in the browser. You're going to be using APIs and just learning about the internet in general. And then you'll be getting data back and practicing with the JavaScript of how to get that data to show up.
like the pulling from nested arrays type of thing?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So I did have a question on if else statements. I can do that really quickly. So an if else statement is just chained its way out, right? So if I say const num equals 5, I can say if the num is less than 0, return console log negative. Else if num is equal to 0, console log it's 0, else console log positive. I don't know if 0 is technically a positive number, but basically what the computer is doing here, if I run this, of course I get positive out because num is 5. What the computer is basically doing is saying, hey, num, I'm going to take that, grab my 5 from right here and put it in. Is 5 less than 0? It's not, so we just completely skip that console log. We pretend like it's not even there. Now it comes in and it says num, which is 5 again. Is that equal to 0? It's not, so we completely skip this right here. We come down here, we've got an else. Well, because this wasn't true and this wasn't true, of course, this must be true, so it console logs that out. Now, what ends up happening is if we say we change. Sorry, if we change our number to 0 here and rerun that code, we're going to 0. Geez, Max. We get it's 0 coming out. Well, why did we not hit this else case? Because this wasn't true. But as soon as we hit the first if case that was true, it's going to log out it's 0. And because it found one that's true, we'll never hit this else case here. So basically, the second you hit your first true if case, it will ignore everything else underneath it and only run the code that's between these curly braces. Does that help? That answer your questions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? I know we're already over for this evening, but giving you guys a chance. Office hours, 5 p.m. on Sunday. They will be fully virtual. I do have some homework to get you guys homework and also to follow up on Common Space memberships. So I will be doing that tomorrow or tonight. All right. Well, if any questions pop up, you know where to find me in Slack. Otherwise, you guys have an awesome time with Ryan. Hope to see you at office hours. Otherwise, have a great next 2 weeks. Have fun learning about APIs and don't hesitate to reach out to schedule one-on-ones with me or any of the other mentors as well.
So are we going to do the capstone checking with you, Max, next week? It's Monday, right?
I will be there for the capstone
Okay.
check-in on Monday. Yes. All right. I'll see you guys later.
Good night, Max.
Good night.